When 8-year-old Marcus Johnson's heart condition worsened, his single mother, Imani, made an impossible choice. Selling her only valuable possession, a family heirloom necklace, she took her son on a desperate bus journey from Detroit to Miami with one hope: to meet Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton before Marcus's risky surgery. Before we begin this incredible journey, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that red button now to never miss heartwarming story like this one. What began as a mother's last-ditch effort to fulfill her son's dream would spark a chain of events no one could have predicted. After a viral photo caught Lewis Hamilton's attention, his response would change their lives forever, revealing a personal connection that explains why the world champion went far beyond a simple meeting. Imani Johnson's hands trembled as she counted the bills spread across her kitchen table. $20, $40, $60, $73. That was all she had left until payday, still a week away. The pile of unpaid bills next to the money seemed to grow taller by the second. Electric bill, rent, car payment, and the biggest one of all, the hospital bill for Marcus's last checkup. Imani rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock. 11:30 p.m. She'd been home from her evening shift at the diner for just an hour. "Mommy?" a small voice called from the hallway. Imani quickly gathered the bills and stuffed them into a drawer. "Marcus, baby, what are you doing up? It's late." 8-year-old Marcus stood in his race car pajamas, clutching his favorite toy, a small silver Mercedes F1 car. His brown eyes, so much like his father's, looked up at her with worry far too grown up for his age. "I couldn't sleep. My heart was doing the jumpy thing again." Imani knelt down and pulled her son close, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. The irregular rhythm was subtle, but there. Dr. Wilson had explained Marcus's heart condition in big, scary words, but what it meant was simple and terrifying. Without surgery, Marcus's heart would keep getting weaker. "Come on, let's get you back to bed," Imani said, lifting Marcus into her arms. Even at 8, he was lighter than other kids his age, another worry that kept her up at night. Marcus's bedroom walls were covered with posters of Formula One races, and one man in particular, Lewis Hamilton. The famous driver smiled down from every angle, holding trophies or standing next to his race car. "Can we watch the race on Sunday?" Marcus asked, as Imani tucked him back under his race car bed sheets. "Lewis is racing in Spain. He's won there 6 times, Mom." "We'll see, baby," Imani said, knowing they wouldn't. Their electricity might be cut off by then if she didn't figure something out. "Lewis never gives up," Marcus whispered, his eyes getting heavy. "Even when he starts at the back, he fights all the way to the front." "That's right," Imani stroked his forehead. "And you're just as strong as Lewis." "Stronger," Marcus mumbled, already drifting off. "Lewis doesn't have a super heart like mine." Imani waited until Marcus's breathing deepened before slipping out of the room. Super heart. That's what she'd told him his condition was. Not a weakness, but a heart so special it needed extra care. Some days, she believed it herself. Back in the kitchen, Imani pulled out her phone and checked her email. There it was, the message from her boss at the office supply store where she worked mornings before her diner shift. "Due to budget cuts, we're reducing staff hours effective immediately." Imani's throat tightened as she read. Her hours were cut in half. Less than half the money, but still the same bills. The same sick child. Outside, rain began to fall. A sharp bang and a hissing sound made Imani rush to the window. In the dim glow of the streetlight, she could see her old Honda sitting crookedly. The front tire was completely flat. Something inside Imani broke. All the fears she'd been holding back for months came flooding out. She sank to the kitchen floor, her back against the refrigerator, and covered her mouth to muffle her sobs. She couldn't wake Marcus. Through tears, her eyes landed on the calendar hanging on the wall. May 18th was circled in red marker. Marcus's birthday was written in her son's messy handwriting with a drawing of a race car next to it, just 2 weeks away. Last week, Marcus had shown her a news article about Lewis Hamilton visiting Miami for the Grand Prix. His eyes had lit up in a way she hadn't seen since before he got sick. "Mom, Lewis is going to be in Miami," he'd exclaimed. "That's in Florida. Florida isn't too far, right?" Miami was over 1,300 miles from Detroit. It might as well have been on the moon. "If I could meet Lewis, I could tell him about my super heart," Marcus had said. "Maybe he'd let me sit in his race car, just for a minute." Imani had changed the subject, but Marcus kept bringing it up. Meeting Lewis Hamilton had become his biggest wish. Next to the calendar hung Marcus's latest hospital report. Surgery was becoming more urgent. The doctor had used the word critical when Marcus was out of the room. The thought that had been hovering at the edges of Imani's mind for weeks now fully formed. What if Marcus didn't get to grow up? What if these were his last wishes? She looked down at her phone, still open to the email about her hours being cut. Below it was another message. From her mother in Chicago. The only person who might have helped. Mom was having her own financial troubles and couldn't send money this month. Mani wiped her tears and pulled herself up from the floor. In Marcus's room, she watched her son sleeping peacefully, his small fingers still wrapped around the Lewis Hamilton toy car. "I'll figure something out," she whispered. "I promise." Back in her room, Imani opened her jewelry box and took out the only valuable thing she owned, her mother's gold necklace passed down from her grandmother. She'd promised herself she'd never sell it, that someday she'd give it to Marcus to give to someone he loved. But what good was a necklace if Marcus didn't get his surgery? What good were promises about the future if he might not have one? Imani's phone glowed with the late-night news. The headline caught her eye. Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton arrives in Miami next week for Grand Prix. Marcus's birthday wish. A chance to meet his hero before his surgery. A crazy, impossible idea began to form in Imani's mind. She looked at the necklace in her palm, then at the photo of Marcus on her nightstand. In the picture, he was holding a get-well-soon balloon from his last hospital stay, smiling bravely. In that moment, Imani made her decision. The breaking point wasn't breaking after all. It was the moment she found her courage. Tomorrow, she would sell the necklace. Somehow, she would get Marcus to Miami. For once in his difficult young life, she would make the impossible happen for her son. Tomorrow, she would sell the necklace. Somehow, she would get Marcus to Miami. For once in his difficult young life, she would make the impossible happen for her son. But first, Imani needed sleep. She tucked the necklace under her pillow and closed her eyes, dreaming of race cars and miracles. Morning came too quickly. Marcus's voice woke her as he sat at the foot of her bed, already dressed in his favorite Lewis Hamilton t-shirt, the one that was now too big because he'd lost weight during his last hospital stay. "Mom, did you forget? It's Saturday. Race qualifying is on TV this morning." Imani blinked sleep from her eyes and checked the time. 7:42 a.m. She'd overslept. "Give me 5 minutes, baby. I'll make breakfast and we can watch together." Marcus's face lit up as he raced to the living room, turning on their old TV and finding the right channel. Imani heard the familiar sound of racing engines and announcers talking excitedly about lap times. In the kitchen, Imani made oatmeal, the only breakfast food left in the cupboard. she added the last spoonful of brown sugar to make it special for Marcus. While the oatmeal cooked, she thought about the day ahead. First, the pawn shop to sell the necklace. Then, somehow, bus tickets to Miami. "Mom, Louis just set the fastest lap," Marcus called from the living room. Imani carried 2 bowls of oatmeal to the couch. Marcus was sitting cross-legged on the floor, just inches from the screen. His eyes never left the silver Mercedes car zooming around the track. "Did you know Louis has won 98 races?" Marcus said, taking his oatmeal without looking away from the TV. "That's more than almost anybody ever." "Is that right?" Imani asked, even though she'd heard this fact at least 20 times before. Marcus loved sharing Lewis Hamilton facts almost as much as he loved watching him race. "Yep. And he grew up without a lot of money, like us," Marcus continued, spooning oatmeal into his mouth between sentences. "His dad worked 3 jobs so Louis could race go-karts when he was a kid." Imani watched her son's face as he talked about Louis. His eyes shined with excitement, and for a moment, she could forget about his heart condition, about the bills, about everything except how happy racing made him. "Tell me again how you first started loving Formula One," Imani said, settling beside him on the floor. Marcus smiled. He loved telling this story. "I was 4, and I was in the hospital getting tests. Remember? I was scared, and you turned on the TV to help me not think about the needles." Imani nodded. She remembered that day clearly. The first time doctors mentioned heart surgery. "And there was a race on," Marcus continued, "and this cool black race car was going super fast, passing everybody. And then they showed the driver, and he looked like me. He had brown skin like me, and he was winning at the two." Memory was so vivid for Marcus that he told it like it had just happened. "And when they said his name, Lewis Hamilton, I thought it sounded like a superhero name. And then he won the race, and they played the British song, and he sprayed champagne everywhere. And on the way home, what did you ask me?" Imani prompted. "Oh, asked if we could learn everything about Lewis Hamilton." Marcus grinned. "And we did." From that day on, Marcus had been obsessed with Formula One racing, especially Lewis Hamilton. Every book from the library, every YouTube video they could watch at the public library's computers, every magazine article, Marcus absorbed them all. For on his 6th birthday, before his condition worsened, Imani had scraped together enough money to buy him a remote-control race car painted silver like Lewis's Mercedes. It was still his prized possession, sitting on a special shelf in his room when he wasn't playing with it. When Marcus had to stay in the hospital for a week last year, he'd asked the nurses to call him Little Louis instead of Marcus. They'd played along, cheering for him as he raced his wheelchair down the hospital hallways. "Mom, look!" Marcus pointed at the screen. "They're showing the track in Miami. That's where Louis will race next week." The TV showed aerial views of the Miami International Autodrome with its turquoise runoff areas designed to look like the ocean. Palm trees lined parts of the track, and a fake marina had been built in one section, complete with real yachts. "It's so cool," Marcus whispered. "It looks like a paradise." Imani squeezed his shoulder. "It sure does." After the qualifying session ended, with Louis qualifying in 4th place, which Marcus assured her was pretty good for this track, Imani told Marcus she had some errands to run. "Can I come?" he asked. "Not this time, baby. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door will stay with you for a couple hours." Marcus frowned but didn't argue. He knew not to push when his mom used her serious voice. In his room, Marcus carefully arranged his collection of Formula One models on his bed. Most were from dollar stores or yard sales, but Imani had made sure they were painted in the right team. colors. The small silver Mercedes with the number 44, Lewis's car, always got the place of honor in the center. On the walls, Lewis Hamilton smiled down from posters Imani had printed at the library. Some showed him racing, others holding trophies. Marcus's favorite was a picture of Lewis kneeling beside a young fan, signing an autograph. "Someday," Marcus whispered to the poster, "I'll meet you too." He pulled out his special notebook, a P-Proby school notebook Imani had covered with racing stickers. Inside, Marcus had written every Lewis Hamilton fact he could find, drawn pictures of race cars, and mapped out his own dream of becoming a driver someday. On the last page, he'd written, in careful letters, "My heart surgery goals. Number 1 on the list, be brave like Lewis. Number 2, get better so I can drive a real race car someday. And number 3, added just last week, meet Lewis Hamilton before my big surgery." Marcus didn't know his mom was out selling her precious necklace, or that she was about to buy bus tickets to Miami. He only knew that wherever Lewis Hamilton raced, there was magic. And right now, more than anything, Marcus needed some magic in his life. Marcus didn't know his mom was out selling her precious necklace, or that she was about to buy bus tickets to Miami. He only knew that wherever Lewis Hamilton raced, there was magic. And right now, more than anything, Marcus needed some magic in his life. The bell above the door jingled as Imani entered Capital Pawn. The shop smelled like old clothes and dust. Behind the glass counter, a balding man with thick glasses looked up from his newspaper. "Can I help you?" he asked, not really sounding like he wanted to. Imani's hand tightened around the small velvet pouch in her pocket. I have a necklace I need to sell." The man sighed and put down his paper. "Let's see it." With trembling fingers, Imani placed her grandmother's gold necklace on the counter. The small heart-shaped pendant caught the light, and for a second, Imani almost snatched it back. The pawnbroker picked it up with little interest. He examined the clasp, then pulled out a small scale. "Gold prices aren't what they used to be," he said, weighing the necklace. "I can give you 200 for it." Imani's heart sank. 200? But it's been in my family for generations. The pendant alone, take it or leave it. The man cut her off. "I got bills to pay too. $200. Not nearly enough for what she needed. But it was something." "Fine," Imani said quietly. As the man counted out the bills, Imani fought back tears. She said a silent apology to her mother and grandmother. Someday, she promised herself, she would find the necklace and buy it back. Her next stop was the bus station. The ticket agent, a woman with kind eyes, looked up bus routes to Miami. "Let's see. Cheapest option is $89 one way per person. That's with 3 transfers, arriving in Miami on Thursday morning." Thursday. That would give them Friday and the weekend in Miami. Just enough time for the race events. The Grand Prix was on Sunday. 2 tickets, please," Imani said, pushing most of her pawn shop money across the counter. Round trip. That left her with just under $50 for food, a place to stay, and whatever else they might need in Miami. Not nearly enough, but Imani would figure it out. She had to. Walking home, Imani tried to plan. They could stay at the cheapest motel she could find. They could pack sandwiches for the bus journey. Maybe she could pick up an extra shift at the diner before they left. The biggest problem was getting close enough to Lewis Hamilton for Marcus to meet him. From what she understood, Formula One drivers were surrounded by security and team personnel. The cheapest race tickets were hundreds of dollars, and those wouldn't get you anywhere near the drivers. But Imani had come too far to worry about that now. First, get to Miami, then figure out the rest. When she got home, Mrs. Rodriguez was helping Marcus with a model race car. "He's been an angel," Mrs. Rodriguez said, gathering her things. "Didn't even complain when he took his medicine." Imani thanked her and promised to bring her some pie from the diner. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Imani sat down next to Marcus on the floor. "What did you do while I was gone?" she asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez helped me make this." Marcus held up his model car proudly. It was a toilet paper roll painted silver with bottle caps for wheels. The number 44 was carefully drawn on the side. "It's beautiful," Imani said, and meant it. "Mom?" Marcus put down his car. "The doctor said my surgery is going to be soon, right?" Imani nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "In about 6 weeks. Will I be okay after?" "The doctors are going to do everything they can to fix your super heart," Imani said, pulling him close. "But what if they can't?" Marcus's voice was small. Imani closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "They will." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "If I could do one big thing before my surgery, I'd want to meet Louis, just to tell him that he helps me. Be brave." This was it, the moment Imani had been waiting for. "What if I told you we're going on a trip? For your birthday, next week?" Marcus looked up, confused. "A trip? Where?" Imani took a deep breath. "Miami." For a second, Marcus didn't react. Then his eyes grew wider than Imani had ever seen them. "Outer feet and fight or throw. Miami? Where the race is? Where Louis is?" His voice rose to almost a squeal. "Yes, baby. I got us bus tickets. We leave Tuesday morning." Marcus jumped up, his entire body vibrating with excitement. "We're going to see Lewis Hamilton?" Imani tried to calm him down. "Now, I can't promise we'll meet him. Formula One drivers are very busy and have lots of security." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was dancing around the room, chanting, "We're going to Miami," over and over. Imani smiled, even as worry gnawed at her stomach. She had no real plan for meeting Lewis Hamilton. No connections, no special passes, not nearly enough money. But seeing the joy on Marcus's face made her determined to find a way. That night, after Marcus finally fell asleep, it took hours, he was so excited, Imani sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. She wrote down everything she knew about the Miami Grand Prix from what Marcus had told her and what she'd looked up at the library. The race was at the Miami International Autodrome. Practice sessions were on Friday, qualifying on Saturday, and the race on Sunday. Drivers sometimes did autograph sessions for fans, but tickets for those events sold out instantly. Imani tapped her pen against the notebook. There had to be a way. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss at the diner. "Need you to cover shifts on Thursday and Friday." Imani's heart sank. They'd be in Miami by then. She texted back, "Can't. Family emergency." The reply came quickly. "Not optional. Need reliable staff." Imani stared at the message, then typed, "I'm sorry. My son comes first." She turned off her phone, knowing she'd probably just lost her second job. But as she looked at the bus tickets, on the table, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. For Marcus, she would risk everything, even if it meant starting over when they got back. If they were lucky, they would return to Detroit with nothing but a beautiful memory. If they were very lucky, maybe, just maybe, they'd come back with a miracle. Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Imani woke Marcus at 5 a.m. for their 7 a.m. bus departure. He was already half awake, too excited to sleep. "Today's the day, Mom," Marcus said, jumping out of bed with more energy than Imani had seen in months. "We're going to Miami." Imani had packed their small suitcase the night before. Just enough clothes for 5 days, Marcus's medicine, and a few snacks for the long bus ride. She'd also packed Marcus's favorite Lewis Hamilton toy car, his race facts notebook, and the homemade paper Mercedes model. "Remember what the doctor said," Imani reminded Marcus as he raced around the apartment. "You need to take it easy. This is going to be a long trip." "I'm fine," Marcus insisted, though Imani noticed he was already breathing a bit harder than normal. "Lewis doesn't quit when he's tired, and neither will I." At the bus station, they found their seats near the back. Imani let Marcus take the window seat. He pressed his face against the glass, watching the city wake up as they pulled away from Detroit. "How long until we get to Miami?" Marcus asked. Imani checked her watch. "About 30 hours. We'll have to change buses a few times." Marcus's eyes widened. 30 hours? That's even longer than a Formula One race. "That's why I packed these." Imani pulled out a deck of cards and a few car magazines she'd bought at the dollar store. "And we'll play I Spy and count license plates, and you can tell me all about Lewis Hamilton." Marcus beamed at her. "Did CT Theats, you know Lewis has won the World Championship 7 times? That's tied for the most ever." "I think you might have mentioned that once or twice," Imani smiled, settling in for a journey filled with racing facts. The first few hours passed smoothly. They played games, read magazines, and ate the sandwiches Imani had packed. Marcus dozed, off while Imani watched the landscape change through the window. Farms and fields replaced city buildings. The rain had stopped, and sunshine broke through the clouds. Their first transfer was in Cincinnati. They had 45 minutes to find their next bus. Marcus held Imani's hand as they navigated the busy station. "My chest feels funny," Marcus said as they waited in line for their second bus. Imani immediately knelt down, putting her hand on his forehead. "Funny how? Does it hurt?" Marcus shook his head. "No, just jumpy. Like my heart is dancing." Imani gave him his medication and some water. She watched him closely as they boarded their next bus. His color seemed okay, but she could tell he was tired. "Let's take a nap on this part of the trip," she suggested. "We need to save our energy for Miami." The second leg of their journey took them through the mountains of Tennessee. Marcus woke up in time to see the rolling landscape. "It looks like the hills on the Monaco track," he exclaimed, his earlier discomfort seemingly forgotten. Their next transfer was in Atlanta, late, at night. The station was less crowded but felt less safe. Imani kept Marcus close as they waited for their overnight bus to Florida. "Mom, I'm hungry," Marcus said. They had eaten the last of their packed food hours ago. Imani checked their money. She had planned to save as much as possible for Miami, but they needed to eat. She found a vending machine and bought them each a pack of crackers and a juice. "It's not much of a dinner," she apologized. "It's an adventure dinner," Marcus said cheerfully, making Imani's heart swell with love for her optimistic boy. The overnight bus was only half full, so they each got 2 seats to stretch out. Imani gave Marcus her jacket as a pillow. She couldn't sleep, though, worrying about what would happen when they reached Miami. Where would they stay? How would they get to the track? How could they possibly meet Lewis Hamilton? Marcus slept fitfully, waking up several times. Around 3 a.m., he sat up suddenly, clutching his chest. "Mom," he gasped, his voice tight with pain. Imani was instantly alert. "What's wrong, baby?" "It hurts," Marcus whispered, tears in his eyes. "My heart." Panic rose in Imani's throat. This was exactly what she had feared. They were in the middle of nowhere, on a bus, with no hospital in sight. Deep breaths, she said, trying to sound calm. Like we practiced with Dr. Wilson. She helped Marcus with his breathing exercises while her mind raced. Should she ask the driver to stop at the next town? Should they turn back? After a few terrifying minutes, Marcus's breathing eased. "It's better now," he said, though his face was pale in the dim bus light. "Are you sure?" Imani asked, her hand on his chest feeling his heartbeat. Marcus nodded. "I don't want to go back, Mom. Please, we're almost there." Imani hesitated, torn between a mother's caution and her promise to her son. "If it happens again, we're finding a hospital right away," she finally said. "No arguments." "Deal," Marcus agreed, laying his head on her lap. "Tell me about Miami again." Imani stroked his hair as she described the palm trees, the beaches, and the racetrack they would see. Marcus fell asleep to the sound of her voice, but Imani stayed awake the rest of the night, watching over him. Dawn broke as they crossed into Florida. The landscape changed again. Palm trees lined the highways, and the air felt different through the bus windows, warmer and somehow lighter. "Look, Marcus!" Imani gently woke her son as they passed a sign. "Welcome to Florida!" Marcus pressed his face against the window, his earlier pain forgotten in the excitement of being in a new state. It's so different from Detroit. Their final bus transfer was in Orlando. They had a 2-hour layover, which they spent in a small park near the station. Marcus chased lizards, while Imani made calls to find the cheapest motel in Miami. The last leg of their journey took them through the Everglades. Marcus was fascinated by the swampy landscape. "Mom, look, was that an alligator?" he asked every few minutes. Finally, 32 hours after leaving Detroit, their bus pulled into the Miami station. It was Thursday morning, just as planned. The air hit them like a warm, wet blanket as they stepped off the bus. "It's so hot!" Marcus exclaimed, immediately taking off his jacket. Imani looked around at the unfamiliar city. Palm trees swayed in the breeze. Cars honked in traffic. Everything was bright, colorful, and overwhelming. "Let's find our motel," she said, checking the address she'd written down. "It's called the Sunshine Inn." They took a city bus to the motel, which was far from the beach in a less touristy area. The building was old and painted a faded pink, but it was the cheapest place Imani could find. Still $70 per night, which would eat up the rest of their money. The room had 2 small beds, a tiny bathroom, and an air conditioner that rattled loudly but barely cooled the space. But it was clean, and when Marcus ran to the window, he could just barely see the tops of the buildings downtown. "We made it, Mom," he said, his eyes shining with happiness. "We're really in Miami." Imani sat on the bed, exhausted from the journey and worry. But seeing Marcus's joy made everything, the lost job, the sold necklace, the uncomfortable bus ride, worth it. "Tomorrow," she promised, "we'll find a way to the track." Marcus threw his arms around her. "This is already the best birthday present ever." Imani hugged him back, praying that the hardest part of their journey was behind them. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that the real challenge was still to come. Imani hugged him back, praying that the hardest part of their journey was behind them. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that the real challenge was still to come. That evening, Imani and Marcus walked to a small grocery store near their motel. They bought bread, peanut butter, and fruit. Cheap food that would last them through the weekend. "We need to save money for the track," Imani explained when Marcus asked if they could get ice cream. As they were paying, Imani noticed a woman watching them. She was in her 50s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and warm brown eyes. "You are here for the race?" the woman asked in accented English. Marcus nodded eagerly. "We came all the way from Detroit to see Lewis Hamilton." "Fee's," woman smiled. "My name is Maria. I work at your motel. I clean the rooms. I'm Imani, and this is my son Marcus," Imani replied, surprised by the friendly conversation. Maria looked at Marcus's Lewis Hamilton t-shirt. "My brother Juan works at the track. He helps set up the food stands." Marcus's eyes went wide. "Really? Has he met Lewis?" Maria laughed. No. The drivers stay far from the food workers, but he knows the track well." As they walked back to the motel together, Maria told them about the bus routes to the Miami International Autodrome. When she heard Imani's vague plan to somehow get close enough for Marcus to see the drivers, she frowned. "Without tickets?" "Very difficult," she said. "Security is tight. But Juan may know some places. I will ask him for you." Imani felt a tiny spark of hope. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." Back in their room, Marcus spread out his racing magazines on the bed. "Mom, look! This shows the track layout. There are 19 turns and 3 long straightaways where the cars go super fast." Imani listened as Marcus explained the track, but her mind was on Maria and her brother. Could this be the break they needed? The next morning, Maria knocked on their door. "Juan says to meet him at Gate 5 at 10 a.m. He will show you some good spots." Marcus could barely eat breakfast. He was so excited. They took the bus Maria had recommended, getting off at a stop crowded with people in Formula One gear. The official tickets cost hundreds of dollars, but Juan had told Maria he could get them into areas where they could at least see the track. The Miami International Autodrome loomed ahead. Massive grandstands rose above concrete barriers and metal fences. Music blared from speakers, and the smell of food filled the air. People streamed through the gates, most wearing team hats and t-shirts. "There's Juan," Maria pointed to a man in a food service uniform, waving at them from a side gate. Juan was tall and friendly, with the same warm eyes as his sister. "Maria told me about your journey," he said, shaking Imani's hand. "Very brave, coming all this way." He knelt down to Marcus's level. "So you want to see Lewis Hamilton, eh? The champion." Marcus nodded, suddenly shy. "Today is practice day," Juan explained. "Not as many people. Security is not as tight. I know where workers can watch from. Come." Juan led them through a service entrance, flashing his worker badge at a guard who barely glanced at them. They followed him past food preparation areas and storage containers until they reached a fence that bordered the track. "Here," Juan said. "You can see turn 9. Cars slow down here." Marcus pressed his face against the fence. The track was empty now, but in the distance, they could see team personnel working in the pit lane. "When do the cars come out?" Marcus asked. Bouncing on his toes, Juan checked his watch. "First practice starts in 1 hour. I must go back to work, but you can stay here. No one will bother you." Imani thanked him profusely. Juan waved it off. "Maria likes you. She has good heart." After Juan left, Imani and Marcus settled in at their spot. It was hot, with little shade, but Marcus didn't seem to notice. His eyes never left the track. Eventually, a roar filled the air. Marcus jumped up. "They're coming!" The first cars appeared, moving faster than Imani had imagined. The sound was deafening as they flashed past, a blur of colors and sponsor logos. "There. He is!" Marcus screamed, pointing at a silver car with a teal stripe. "That's Lewis's car! Number 44. Imani couldn't tell one car from another at these speeds, but Marcus seemed to have no trouble. His face was alight with pure joy as the cars completed lap after lap, testing the limits of the track. When the session ended, Juan returned with bottles of water and a treat, access to the fan zone. "They have team displays there," he explained. "No drivers, but cool things to see." The fan zone was packed with people, but Juan guided them through the crowd to the Mercedes display. There sat a show car painted just like Lewis Hamilton's race car. "Fans can sit in it for photos," Juan said, gesturing to the line of people waiting their turn. When it was Marcus's turn, a team member helped him climb into the cockpit. Imani took photos with her phone, blinking back tears at the sight of her son sitting in a Formula One car, even if it wasn't a real one. "Mom! It's so cool!" Marcus called out. "The seat is so low, and the steering wheel has so many buttons." After the fan zone, Juan showed them one more spot, a hill where they could watch the cars on the main straight. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Imani noticed Marcus was getting tired. "We should find some shade," she suggested. Marcus shook his head stubbornly. "I'm fine. I don't want to miss anything." But as the afternoon wore on, Marcus's energy flagged. His face grew pale, and Imani noticed he was breathing harder than normal. "Time for a break," she insisted, no longer asking. "Let's get you some water and rest." Juan found them a spot in the shade near a water station. Marcus sipped water slowly, his earlier excitement dimmed by exhaustion. "Will we come back tomorrow?" he asked, his voice small. "Of course," Imani promised. "Tomorrow is qualifying day, even more exciting." Juan had to return to work, but before he left, he said, "Tomorrow I can show you a different spot. Sometimes team members walk past on their way to the paddock." Marcus perked up. "Really? Could we see Lewis?" "Maybe," Juan said. "No promises, but maybe." By late afternoon, Marcus was clearly struggling. The heat, excitement, and exertion had worn him out completely. Imani decided it was time to head back to the motel. "But we might miss something," Marcus protested weakly. "Health first," Imani said firmly. "We have 2 more days." On the bus ride back, Marcus fell asleep against Imani's shoulder. His face was flushed, and his breathing seemed labored. Worry gnawed at Imani's stomach. Had she made a terrible mistake bringing him here? At the motel, Maria took one look at Marcus and brought a fan to their room. "The heat is too much for him," she said. "He needs rest, cool water, and quiet." As Imani tucked Marcus into bed, he murmured sleepily, "Today was amazing, Mom. The best day ever." Imani kissed his forehead, alarmed at how warm it felt. "Rest now, baby. Tomorrow will be even better." But as Marcus drifted off to sleep, Imani wondered if they would make it to the track tomorrow at all. His health had to come first, even before his dream of meeting Lewis Hamilton. But as Marcus drifted off to sleep, Imani wondered if they would make it to the track tomorrow at all. His health had to come first, even before his dream of meeting Lewis Hamilton. Imani barely slept that night. Every hour, she checked on Marcus, touching his forehead and listening to his breathing. His fever wasn't dangerously high, but it worried her all the same. Away from their regular doctor, in a strange city, with no health insurance that would work here, every small symptom felt magnified. Around 3 a.m., Marcus woke up coughing. "Mom?" he called out in the darkness. "I don't feel good." Imani was by his side instantly. "What hurts, baby?" "My chest feels tight," Marcus said, "and my head hurts." Imani gave him his medication and a glass of water. She helped him sit up against the pillows to ease his breathing. "Better?" she asked after a few minutes. Marcus nodded slightly. I'm sorry, Mom. Sorry for what? For getting sick. Now we might miss qualifying. Imani stroked his hair. Don't you worry about that. All that matters is you feeling better. But we came all this way, Marcus whispered. We spent all our money. We came all this way for you to be happy, Imani corrected. And there's still Sunday, race day. Marcus seemed comforted by this and drifted back to sleep. Imani sat beside him, her mind racing. Should she take him to a hospital? Would they even treat him without insurance? How much would it cost? Morning came with gray skies and rain tapping against the window. Marcus's fever had broken, but he was still weak and pale. How do you feel? Imani asked when his eyes fluttered. Open. Tired, Marcus admitted, but better than last night. A soft knock on the door announced Maria, bringing them toast and orange juice. I thought you might need breakfast, she said, eyeing Marcus with concern. The boy does not look well. He had a rough night, Imani explained. I think the heat and excitement was too much. Maria nodded knowingly. My nephew has heart problems too. The doctor here is good, Dr. Vega. I can call him for you. Imani hesitated, thinking of the cost. But Marcus's health came first. Yes, please, she said. If he could just check Marcus over, make sure it's safe for him to be out. Dr. Vega arrived an hour later, a kindly man with salt and pepper hair, who reminded Imani of Marcus's regular doctor back in Detroit. He examined Marcus thoroughly, listening to his heart and checking his breathing. His heart rhythm is irregular, but not dangerous, Dr. Vega explained. He needs rest, cool air, and no excitement for today. But qualifying is today, Marcus protested weakly. We have to go back to the track. Dr. Vega shook his head. Not today, young man. Perhaps tomorrow, if you rest well. After the doctor left, charging much less than Imani had feared, Marcus turned his face to the wall, trying to hide his tears. I'll never get to meet Louis now, he said. Imani sat on the edge of his bed. We still have race day, Marcus. And Juan said that's when we'd have the best chance of spotting Louis anyway. But what if I'm still sick tomorrow? Then we'll find another way, Imani promised, though she had no idea what that might be. Outside, the rain fell harder. Qualifying would still happen. Formula One cars raced in the rain, Marcus had told her many times, but Imani was secretly relieved they wouldn't be standing in it. To cheer Marcus up, Imani found the F1 qualifying session on TV. The small motel television didn't have great reception, but it was enough for them to follow the action. Look, Marcus pointed at the screen. Louis is P3. That's really good in the rain. The excitement of watching qualifying improved Marcus's spirits, but by the end of the session, he was dozing again. Imani covered him with a blanket and stepped outside their room to call Dr. Wilson back in Detroit. His symptoms aren't unusual, given the stress of travel, Dr. Wilson assured her after she described Marcus's condition. But I wish you had consulted me before making this trip, Imani. I know, Imani said, guilt washing over her. It was impulsive. Well, follow Dr. Vega's advice. Rest today, limited activity tomorrow, and come straight to my office when you get back. His surgery can't wait much longer. After hanging up, Imani stood in the motel hallway, fighting tears. Had this whole journey been a mistake? Had she risked Marcus's health for nothing? Maria found her there and wordlessly offered a hug. Imani accepted, finally letting a few tears fall. My brother says tomorrow is the best day anyway, Maria said. The drivers are more relaxed, the crowd's more excited. A better day for your boy's dream. Back in the room, Marcus was awake and looking more like himself. The rest and medicine seemed to be working. "Mom, I had an idea," he said, sitting up in bed. "Can I make a sign to hold up tomorrow? Maybe if Louis sees it, he'll stop." "That's a great idea," Imani said, glad to see his determination returning. "What will it say?" Marcus thought for a minute. "How about, 'Louis, you're my hero. I'm fighting.'" "2." Imani's throat tightened. "That's perfect, baby." They spent the afternoon making a sign using supplies from the motel's Lost and Found, a piece of cardboard from a box, and markers someone had left behind. Marcus worked slowly, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he carefully drew the number 44 and the Mercedes logo. "There," he said finally, holding up his creation. "Do you think Louis will see it?" "We'll make sure he does," Imani promised, though she had no idea how. As the day faded into evening, Marcus's strength seemed to return. He ate all of his dinner and talked excitedly about tomorrow's race. "It's our last chance, Mom," he said seriously. "But I just know something good will happen. I can feel it." Imani smiled at her son's unwavering optimism. After all they'd been through, the long journey, the money problems, today's setback, he still believed in miracles. And looking at his bright, hopeful face, Imani found herself believing too. Imani smiled at her son's unwavering optimism. After all they'd been through, the long journey, the money problems, today's setback, he still believed in miracles. And looking at his bright, hopeful face, Imani found herself believing too. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself was celebrating race day. Marcus woke early, jumping out of bed with renewed energy. "Mom, it's race day!" he shouted, pulling back the curtains to let sunshine flood their small room. Imani watched him carefully, looking for any signs of yesterday's illness. But Marcus moved with excitement, his eyes bright and his cheeks pink with anticipation, rather than fever. "How do you feel?" she asked, putting a hand on his forehead. "Normal temperature." "I feel great," Marcus insisted, already reaching for his Lewis Hamilton t-shirt. "Dr. Vega's medicine really helped. Can we go early?" Juan said, "Race. Day is super crowded." Imani nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, we'll go early. But you have to promise to tell me right away if you start feeling bad." "I promise," Marcus said solemnly, raising his hand like he was taking an oath. "Scout's honor." They ate a quick breakfast of fruit and cereal bars, then packed a small bag with water bottles, Marcus's medicine, and his carefully made sign. Maria appeared as they were leaving, handing them each a paper bag. "Sandwiches," she explained. "Food at the track costs too much." "Thank you for everything," Imani said, giving the kind woman a hug. "We wouldn't have made it this far without you." Maria waved away her thanks. "Juan will meet you at the same gate as Friday. He says to be there by 8 o'clock. The drivers arrive early on race day." The bus to the track was packed with excited fans wearing team colors and waving flags. Marcus clutched his sign carefully, making sure it didn't get bent in the crowd. "Look, Mom!" he pointed out the window as the Miami International Autodrome came into view. "The grandstands are already filling up." The area around the track was transformed from Friday. Thousands of fans streamed toward the entrance gates. Music blasted from speakers. Food vendors called out their offerings. The excitement in the air was almost electric. Juan was waiting at Gate 5 as promised, looking more serious than on Friday. "Today is much harder," he warned as he greeted them. "Security is tight for race day, but I have a plan." He led them through the service entrance again, But this time a different guard was checking badges. Juan spoke rapidly in Spanish, gesturing to Marcus and his sign. The guard frowned, then noticed Marcus's eager face and medical alert bracelet. After a moment's hesitation, he waved them through. "What did you tell him?" Imani asked when they were past. "The truth," Juan said simply. "That this boy has come very far to see his hero." Juan guided them to a spot near where the drivers would enter the track. Already, a small crowd had gathered, other fans hoping for a glimpse of their favorite. Drivers. Most drivers come in expensive cars with dark windows, Juan explained. They drive straight through to the paddock. But sometimes, if they see fans, especially children, he shrugged. Who knows? Today could be lucky. They found a place at the front of the small crowd, where Marcus could hold up his sign without it being blocked. Juan had to go to work, but promised to check on them later. "This is it, Mom," Marcus whispered, clutching his sign tightly. "Our last chance." Imani squeezed his shoulder. "Whatever happens today, I'm so proud of you. You never gave up hope." They waited for 2 hours. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them. Imani made sure Marcus drank water and stayed in the narrow strip of shade from a nearby fence. Other fans around them were friendly, sharing snacks and racing stories. A murmur ran through the crowd as the first car approached. A red Ferrari. The fans holding Ferrari flags cheered as the car slowed slightly. The driver, hidden behind dark sunglasses, gave a quick wave before accelerating toward the paddock. More cars arrived, team principals, engineers, and more drivers. Some barely slowed down, while others took time to sign a few autographs before security hurried them along. "There!" a fan next to them pointed. "That's Lewis's car!" A sleek black Mercedes approached slowly. Marcus held his sign higher, his small, arms trembling with effort and excitement. "Lewis! Lewis!" the crowd chanted. The car slowed as it approached their spot. Imani lifted Marcus onto her hip so he would be more visible, ignoring the strain on her back. Through the tinted windows, they could just make out the shape of someone inside. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the car might stop completely. Marcus's face was pure hope as he held his sign up higher. But then, security waved the car forward, and it accelerated away toward the paddock entrance. "Did he see me?" Marcus asked, his voice small with disappointment. "I'm sure he did, baby," Imani said, though she had no idea if Lewis had even glanced their way. Marcus's shoulders slumped as she set him down. "It's okay," he said, trying to sound brave. "At least we got to see his car." A kind woman nearby patted Marcus's shoulder. "The race is still going to be amazing," she encouraged. "And Lewis might win today." Marcus nodded, putting on a brave face. But Imani could see the disappointment in his eyes. After everything, the long journey, the expense, his illness yesterday, his one simple wish hadn't come true. Juan returned to guide them to a spot where they could watch the race. It wasn't as good as having actual grandstand tickets, but they could see a portion of the track and a big screen showing the race coverage. As they settled in to wait for the race to start, Imani noticed a man taking photos of the crowd. He paused when he saw Marcus, still clutching his sign, even though there was no chance of Lewis seeing it now. "Hey, buddy," the photographer said, kneeling to Marcus's level. "Mind if I take a picture of you with your sign? I'm covering the race for a local blog." Marcus shrugged. "Sure." The man snapped a few photos, then asked, "What's your name?" "Marcus Johnson. I came all the way from Detroit to see Lewis Hamilton." The photographer raised his eyebrows, looking at Imani. "That's quite a journey. Lewis inspires him," Imani explained simply. "We sold everything to come." The man nodded thoughtfully, typing something on his phone. Then he thanked them and moved on through the crowd. "Maybe we'll be famous on his blog," Marcus joked, his spirits lifting a little. Imani hugged him close. "You're already my famous little champion." The crowd around them began to cheer as the driver's parade started. It was race time. Imani hugged him close. "You're already my famous little champion." The crowd around them began to cheer as the driver's parade started. It was race time. The driver's parade was a tradition before every Formula One race. All 20 drivers rode around the track in classic cars, waving to fans. Marcus pushed his way to the fence, straining to see. "There he is," Marcus pointed excitedly. "That's Lewis in the blue car." Imani could just make out Lewis Hamilton riding in a vintage convertible. He wore sunglasses and his race suit, tied around his waist in the Miami heat. Even from a distance, he had a presence about him that made him stand out from the other drivers. "He looks ready to race," Imani said, happy to see Marcus's excitement returning despite their earlier disappointment. "Lewis always says the most. Important thing is focus," Marcus explained, sounding like a tiny expert. "He meditates before races to clear his mind." After the parade, Juan found them again and led them to a better viewing spot, a small hill where they could see the cars, speeding down the main straight. "I brought these," Juan said, handing them each a pair of earplugs. "The cars are very loud, not good for little ears." The crowd around them grew as race time approached. People squeezed in tight, jostling for the best view. Imani kept Marcus close, worried he might get crushed or overheated in the mass of bodies. "You okay?" she asked, noticing Marcus was quieter than usual. He nodded. "Just saving my energy. Lewis says you have to be smart about when to push hard." The announcers' voices boomed over loudspeakers, building excitement as the start time neared. On the big screens around the track, they showed the drivers preparing in their garages, putting on helmets and climbing into their cars. "Lewis looks serious today," Marcus observed, watching the screen. "That's his winning face." Finally, the moment arrived. The cars rolled out of the pit lane for their formation lap, engines roaring. Even with earplugs, the sound was overwhelming, a physical force that Imani could feel in her chest. Marcus was vibrating with excitement. "The Mercedes engine has over 1,000 horsepower," he shouted over the noise. "That's like 20 regular cars." The cars lined up on the starting grid. The 5 red lights appeared one by one on the starting gantry, then went out. 20 cars launched forward with an explosive sound that made Imani jump. "Go, Lewis!" Marcus screamed, though his voice was lost in the thunderous noise of the race. Start. The first lap was chaos. Cars jockeying for position, some nearly touching as they fought for every inch of track. Imani couldn't tell one car from another in the colorful blur, but Marcus seemed to have no trouble. "Lewis is P4 now. He gained a position," he shouted, jumping up and down. They watched as the cars came around lap after lap, flashing past their viewing spot in seconds. Marcus kept his eyes on the silver Mercedes with the number 44, his hero's car. Between passes, he watched the big screen to see what was happening on other parts of the track. "The Ferrari and Red Bull are fighting for first," he explained to Imani. "Lewis is trying to catch them." About halfway through the race, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. On the big screen, they saw Lewis Hamilton's car slide sideways coming out of a corner. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like he would crash into the wall. "No," Marcus cried, his hands over his mouth. But somehow, with lightning-fast reflexes, Lewis corrected the slide and kept the car on track, barely losing position. "Did you see that?" Marcus was practically dancing with excitement. That was amazing! Most drivers would have crashed. Imani had to admit it was impressive, even to her untrained eye. The skill it took to control a car at those speeds seemed almost superhuman. As the race progressed, the heat began to take its toll on the crowd. People looked wilted, fanning themselves with programs and gulping water. Imani kept a careful watch on Marcus, making him drink water and stay in patches of shade when possible. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked during a quieter moment. "I'm good," Marcus assured her, though his face was flushed. "This is the best day ever, Mom. Thank you for bringing me." His simple gratitude made all the hardship worthwhile. Imani blinked back tears, overwhelmed by love for her brave little boy. The race entered its final laps with increased intensity. The top 3 drivers, now including Lewis in 3rd place, were separated by just seconds. "He's catching them!" Marcus shouted as Lewis's car seemed to find extra speed. "Come on, Lewis!" The crowd around them was on their feet, caught up in the excitement. Even Imani found herself cheering as the silver Mercedes inched closer to the cars ahead. But there weren't enough laps left. Lewis Hamilton crossed the finish line in 3rd place, just behind the Ferrari and Red Bull. The crowd erupted in cheers for all 3 podium finishers. "3rd place! That's a podium finish!" Marcus exclaimed, his face glowing with joy. "That means we'll see him on the podium ceremony." Juan helped them find a spot where they could see the podium, a raised platform where the top 3 drivers would receive their trophies. The ceremony began with the playing of the Italian national anthem for the Ferrari driver who'd won, followed by speeches and the spraying of champagne. Marcus watched in awe as Lewis Hamilton raised his 3rd place trophy, smiling and congratulating the other drivers. Even in defeat, Lewis showed grace and sportsmanship. "That's why he's the best," Marcus said softly. "He always stays positive, even when he doesn't win." After the ceremony, the crowd began to disperse. The race was over. Their adventure in Miami was coming to an end. Tomorrow, they would take the long bus journey back to Detroit, returning to their regular lives, the unpaid bills, the upcoming surgery, the uncertain future. "I wish we could have met him," Marcus said as they walked toward the exit, his sign now hanging limply by his side. "Just to say thank you for being my inspiration." "I know, baby," Imani said, holding his hand tightly. "But you got to see him race. That's something, right?" Marcus nodded, trying to be brave. "Yeah, it was awesome." Juan found them near the exit gate. "Did you enjoy the race?" he asked Marcus. "It was the best thing ever," Marcus replied. "Lewis was amazing in turn 7 when he almost crashed." Juan smiled. "My sister says you leave tomorrow?" Imani nodded. "The bus leaves at noon. We can't thank you and Maria enough for all your help." "It was my pleasure," Juan said. "Wait here a moment." He disappeared into the crowd, returning a few minutes later with a small package wrapped in napkins. "From the Ferrari team celebration," he explained, handing it to Marcus. "A piece of their victory cake. I told them about the brave boy from Detroit." Marcus's eyes widened as he unwrapped a slice of cake decorated with the Ferrari logo. "Wow, thank you." It was a small gesture, but it brought the smile back to Marcus's face. As they left the track, he chatted happily about every moment of the race, reliving the excitement. Back at the motel, Maria was waiting to hear all about their day. Marcus told her every detail while devouring his Ferrari cake. Later, as Marcus got ready for bed, Imani checked their bus tickets and the little money they had left. Just enough to get home, but not much more. She hadn't even allowed herself to think about the job she'd probably lost, or the bills waiting for them in Detroit. "Mom?" Marcus called from the bathroom, interrupting her worried thoughts. "Today was the best birthday present ever, even if we didn't meet Louis." Imani smiled, pushing her worries aside. "I'm glad, baby. Now get some sleep. We have a long trip tomorrow." As she tucked Marcus into bed, he yawned sleepily. "Maybe someday we can come back," he murmured. "Or maybe someday I'll be the one racing, and Louis will watch me." "Maybe so," Imani said, kissing his forehead. "Dream big, my little champion." Within minutes, Marcus was asleep, still clutching his program from the race. Imani sat beside him, watching his peaceful face and listening to his breathing. The journey had been worth it, she decided. Even without meeting Lewis Hamilton, Marcus had experienced joy and excitement that would give him strength for the challenges ahead. But as she looked at his small face, Imani couldn't help wishing for that one last miracle, the meeting that would have made his dream complete. But as she looked at his small face, Imani couldn't help wishing for that one last miracle, the meeting that would have made his dream complete. What Imani didn't know was that a miracle was already in motion, traveling through the digital world at the speed of light. Earlier that day, the photographer who had taken Marcus's picture had posted it on Twitter. The image showed Marcus holding his sign. "Louis, you're my hero. I'm fighting too." His face a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Next to him stood Imani, dark circles under her eyes, her arm protectively around her son. The photographer, whose name was Carlos, had written, "This brave little boy waited hours in the heat to meet a Lewis Hamilton. His mom looks exhausted. They traveled all the way from Detroit. Hope Louis sees this." F1 Miami. At first, the tweet got a few likes from Carlos's followers. Then a popular F1 fan account retweeted it. Then another. As the race was underway, the photo began spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. By the time Lewis Hamilton stood on the podium with his third-place trophy, the image of Marcus had been shared thousands of times. F1 fans around the world were touched by the little boy's story. Someone added more information. "His name is Marcus. He has a heart condition, and his mom sold a family heirloom to get him to Miami." No one was quite sure where this additional detail came from. Perhaps Carlos had overheard more than Imani realized, but it made the story even more powerful. F1 journalists began retweeting it, then team members, then other drivers. The hashtag #JarWars Help Marcus Meet Louis started trending during the post-race coverage, and at some point, amid the celebrations and post-race interviews, someone showed the tweet to a member of Lewis Hamilton's team. None of this was known to Imani as she finally fell asleep in the chair beside Marcus's bed, her own exhaustion catching up with her. She was awakened the next morning by a knock on their motel room door. Blinking sleepily, Imani checked the time. 7:30 a.m. They didn't need to leave for the bus station until 10. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Imani opened the door to find Maria, looking unusually excited. "You must see this," Maria said, thrusting her phone into Imani's hands. "My daughter showed me. It's all over the internet." Imani stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It was a picture of Marcus from yesterday, holding his sign. And next to it was a response from Lewis Hamilton's official account. "Does anyone know how to contact this young fan? Please DM me. F1 Miami." "I don't understand," Imani said, her brain still foggy with sleep. "When did this happen?" "Last night, after the race," Maria explained. My daughter says everyone is talking about it. The little boy who came to Miami to meet Lewis Hamilton. Marcus stirred in the bed, rubbing his eyes. Mom? What's going on? Imani sat beside him, still trying to process what was happening. Remember? That man who took your picture yesterday? He put it on the internet, and a lot of people have seen it, including… She paused, hardly believing it herself. Lewis Hamilton. Marcus sat bolt upright, suddenly wide awake. Lewis Hamilton saw my picture? It seems that way, Imani said cautiously. He's asking how to contact you. Marcus's mouth fell open, his eyes as wide as saucers. Lewis Hamilton is looking for me? Before Imani could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification. She hadn't checked social media since they arrived in Miami. She'd been too busy taking care of Marcus and trying to make his dream come true. Now she saw dozens of notifications and messages. People had tagged her in posts about the viral photo. Friends from Detroit had seen it and identified her. And there, at the top of her notifications, was a direct message from an account she didn't recognize. Hello, I'm Angela, personal assistant to Lewis Hamilton. Lewis saw the photo of your son and would like to meet him before you leave Miami. Is this possible? Please call me at this number. Imani's hands trembled as she showed the message to Marcus. I think Lewis Hamilton wants to meet you today. Marcus stared at the phone, then at his mother, then back at the phone. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Is this real? He finally whispered. I think so, Imani said, equally stunned. I'm going to call this number. She stepped outside the room to make the call, still in her pajamas, her heart racing. A woman with a British accent answered on the second ring. Hello? Is this Imani Johnson? I'm Angela, Lewis's PA. Thank you for calling back so quickly. Is this really happening? Imani asked, her voice shaking. Angela laughed warmly. Yes, it's really happening. Lewis saw the photo last night and was quite moved. He'd very much like to meet your son. I understand you're leaving Miami today? Our bus leaves at noon, Imani confirmed, still dazed. Perfect. Lewis has some time this morning before his flight. Could you be at the track by 9:30? I can arrange for someone to pick you up. Imani agreed, thanked her profusely, and ended the call. She stood outside the motel room for a moment, taking deep breaths. Was this a dream? Would she wake up on the bus back to Detroit, disappointing Marcus all over again? When she re-entered the room, Marcus was sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the door. Well? He asked, barely breathing. We need to get dressed, Imani said, trying to keep her voice steady. Someone is picking us up at 8:45 to take us to the track. Lewis Hamilton wants to meet you before he leaves Miami. Marcus's face transformed with pure joy. He leaped up, wincing slightly as the sudden movement strained his heart, but too excited to care. It's happening? He shouted, dancing around the small room. It's really happening? It's really happening, Imani confirmed, her own face breaking into a wide smile. They rushed to get ready, showering, brushing teeth, putting on their nicest clothes. Marcus insisted on wearing his Lewis Hamilton t-shirt, of course. He brushed his hair carefully and practiced what he would say. Should I ask him to sign my toy car? Is that too much? What if I can't think of anything to say? What if I say something stupid? Just be yourself, Imani assured him, though her own stomach was fluttering with nerves. That's who Lewis wants to meet, the real Marcus. Maria helped them pack their suitcase so they could go straight to the bus station afterward. It's like a fairy tale, she kept saying, shaking her head in amazement. At exactly 8:45, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the motel. A friendly driver in a Mercedes team shirt stepped out. "Mrs. Johnson and Marcus?" he asked with a smile. "My name is David. I'm here to take you to meet Louis." Marcus stared at the Mercedes logo on David's shirt, then at the gleaming car, then back at his mother. "This is really happening," he whispered again, as if saying it might make it more believable. Imani squeezed his hand. "Yes, baby. This is really happening." They said goodbye to Maria, promising to let her know how it went, and climbed into the SUV. As they drove away from the motel, Imani looked back at the small pink building where they had experienced both disappointment and hope. The journey that had seemed like it might end in heartbreak was taking one final, unexpected turn. They said goodbye to Maria, promising to let her know how it went, and climbed into the SUV. As they drove away from the motel, Imani looked back at the small pink building where they had experienced both disappointment and hope. The journey that had seemed like it might end in heartbreak was taking one final unexpected turn. "Is the track far from here?" Marcus asked David, their driver, as they merged onto the highway. "About 20 minutes, David replied with a friendly smile. "How did you enjoy the race yesterday?" "It was amazing." Marcus launched into a detailed description of his favorite moments, especially Louis's near crash and recovery. David laughed. "You really know your Formula One. Louis will be impressed." The mention of Louis sent Marcus into nervous silence. He stared out the window, suddenly lost in thought. "You okay, baby?" Imani asked softly. Marcus nodded. "I'm just thinking about what to say to Louis. I've dreamed about meeting him for so long, and now it's really happening." "Just speak from your heart," Imani advised, though her own heart was racing with excitement and nervousness. The track looked different today. Without the crowds, the Miami International Autodrome seemed both bigger and smaller somehow. Security guards stood at the entrances, but David drove past them with a wave, heading to a back entrance marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "This is the private entrance to the paddock area," David explained as they pulled up to a security gate. "The teams and drivers use it." A guard checked their names against a list, then waved them through. Marcus pressed his face against the window, taking in everything with wide eyes. "Look, Mom! Those are the garages where they keep the cars." They parked near a row of sleek glass-fronted buildings. Angela, Louis's personal assistant, was waiting for them, a professional-looking woman with a kind smile and a Mercedes team headset. "Welcome, Imani and Marcus," she greeted them warmly. "I'm so glad we could arrange this before you had to leave. Louis is very much looking forward to meeting you." Marcus suddenly looked shy, half hiding behind Imani. The reality of meeting his hero seemed to be hitting him all at once. "He's a bit nervous," Imani explained, putting a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "That's perfectly understandable," Angela said. "Louis suggested we meet in the hospitality area. It's quieter there and more private." She checked her watch. "He should be finishing up a team debrief in about 10 minutes. Shall we wait inside?" They followed Angela into a modern building with the Mercedes logo on the door. Inside was a lounge area with comfortable furniture, a refreshment bar, and large screens showing race highlights. It was completely empty except for them. "Please make yourselves comfortable. Would you like anything to drink? Water? Juice?" Marcus asked for apple juice and Imani requested water. Her mouth felt suddenly dry with anticipation. While they waited, Angela explained that most of the team had already left Miami, but Louis had stayed an extra day for some sponsor obligations. The photo of Marcus really touched him, she said. He insisted on rearranging his schedule when he saw it. Marcus sat perched on the edge of his seat, his juice barely touched. Every few seconds, He glanced at the door. Imani checked her watch. It was almost 10 a.m. Their bus was scheduled to leave at noon. They still had to get back to the bus station, but she pushed the worry aside. Nothing was going to cut this moment short for Marcus. Suddenly, the door opened. Marcus froze, his eyes growing impossibly wide. Lewis Hamilton walked in, dressed casually in jeans and a simple black t-shirt, his signature diamond earrings catching the light. "Hello," he said with a warm smile. "You must be Marcus." For a moment, Marcus seemed unable to move or speak. Then, as if a spell had broken, he jumped to his feet, a huge smile spreading across his face. "Yes, I'm Marcus. I'm your biggest fan. I've watched all your races, and I know all about your career and your dogs and your championships and—" He stopped, taking a breath. "Sorry, I'm talking too much." Lewis laughed, a genuine, kind laugh. "Not at all. It's nice to meet someone so enthusiastic." He held out his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcus." Marcus shook Lewis's hand with such reverence, you would think he was touching something sacred. "It's the best day of my life," he said simply. Lewis turned to Imani. "And you must be Marcus's mom. I understand you went through quite a journey to get here." "Yes," Imani said, shaking his hand. "I'm Imani. Thank you so much for making time to meet us." "Please, sit down." Lewis gestured to the couches. "I'd love to hear more about you both." Lewis sat across from them, completely focused on Marcus as if he were the most important person in the world. "So, tell me, Marcus, what was your favorite part of the race yesterday?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "When you almost crashed in turn 7, but saved it. Everyone around us gasped, but I knew you wouldn't crash." "You're too good," Lewis smiled. "That was a close one. I thought I might be in the wall for a second there." For the next 15 minutes, Lewis chatted with Marcus about racing, answering his questions with thoughtful responses. He seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's observations about the different tracks and drivers. Then Lewis noticed the medical alert bracelet on Marcus's wrist. "Is that what your sign meant? About fighting too?" Marcus nodded, suddenly more serious. "I have a heart condition. I need surgery soon." He hesitated, then added, "Sometimes I get scared about it. But then I think about how you never give up, even when things are hard." A shadow of emotion passed over Lewis's face. "That means a lot to me, Marcus. More than you know." There was a knock at the door, and Angela poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, Lewis, but we need to leave for the airport in 20 minutes." Lewis nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "I have a message for you, Marcus. Something important." Marcus leaned forward, hanging on every word. "Life is full of challenges," Lewis said, his voice gentle but firm. "Some of them seem impossible at first, but I have learned that the strongest people aren't the ones who never face difficulties. They're the ones who keep fighting through them." Reached out and tapped Marcus's chest lightly. "Real strength comes from in here. And from what I can see, you've got plenty of it." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness. "Thank you," he whispered. Lewis smiled. "Now, I think we should take some photos to remember this meeting. And I might have a few small gifts for my #1 Detroit fan." As Angela stepped forward with a camera, Marcus turned to his mother, his face glowing with joy. "See, Mom?" he said. "I told you miracles happen." Imani, too overwhelmed to speak, could only nod in agreement. "See, Mom?" he said. "I told you miracles happen." Imani, too overwhelmed to speak, could only nod in agreement. Angela took several photos of Marcus with Lewis, standing together, sitting on the couch, talking, and One where Lewis pretended to interview Marcus with a pretend microphone, making the boy laugh. "I have something for you," Lewis said, reaching for a bag that Angela handed him. "Just a few things to remember today by." From the bag, Lewis pulled out a Mercedes team cap. But it wasn't new. It was worn at the edges, with small marks of tape. Residue on the underside of the bill. "This is the cap I wore during yesterday's race," Lewis explained, placing it carefully on Marcus's head. "It's still got my sweat on it, I'm afraid." Marcus touched the cap with reverent fingers, his eyes wide. "You wore this? Yesterday? During the actual race?" Lewis nodded. "After the race, when the helmet comes off, this goes on. It's tradition." The IT cap was too big for Marcus, slipping down over his ears, but he pushed it back and grinned like he'd just been crowned king. Next, Lewis pulled out a small model of his race car. But unlike the toys Marcus had at home, this one was highly detailed. "Andy, exact replica of this season's Mercedes. This is from our development team," Lewis said. "They use these for wind tunnel testing. Not many people have them." Marcus held the model car like it was made of glass. "It's perfect," he whispered, turning it over to examine every detail. "One more thing," Lewis said, pulling out a permanent marker. "I think we should sign your favorite toy car too. The one in your pocket." Marcus gasped. "How did you know I have it with me?" Lewis smiled. "I noticed the shape in your pocket. Plus, I used to carry my favorite toy cars everywhere too." Shyly, Marcus pulled out his well-loved toy Mercedes, the one he'd slept with almost every night since he got it. The silver paint was chipped, and one of the wheels was slightly wobbly, but Marcus handed it over with pride. Lewis took it gently, turning it over in his hands. "This has seen some good races, I can tell." "It's won hundreds," Marcus confirmed, seriously. "Just like you." Lewis signed his name on the bottom of the car, then handed it back. Now it's officially a champion's car. While Marcus was examining his treasures, Lewis turned to Imani. His expression had changed, becoming more serious. "Angela told me a bit about your situation," he said quietly, so Marcus wouldn't hear. "About the journey from Detroit, and how Marcus has surgery coming up." Imani nodded, not sure what to say. "Would you mind if I ask him about it?" Lewis requested. "I don't want to upset him, but I'd like to understand better." "Of course," Imani said, touched by his consideration. Lewis turned back to Marcus, who was still admiring his signed toy car. "Marcus, your mom tells me you have an important surgery coming up. Would you tell me about it?" Instead of becoming sad or scared, Marcus's face lit up at having Lewis's attention again. "It's for my super heart," he explained. "That's what my mom calls it. The doctors say it's growing wrong and they need to fix it." "A super heart," Lewis repeated, seeming genuinely interested. "That sounds special." "It is. It makes me tired sometimes, and I can't run as fast as other kids. But Mom says it's because my heart is so busy being awesome at other things." Imani felt her throat tighten at her son's words. She had created that story to help him cope, never imagining he would one day share it with his hero. "What kinds of awesome things?" Lewis asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Being brave, and loving racing, and keeping me alive even though it has to work extra hard." Lewis nodded seriously. "Those are extremely important jobs. The doctors say after surgery, I might be able to run faster," Marcus continued. "But I'll still have a scar." He traced a line down the center of his chest. "Scars are badges of honor," Lewis said, rolling up his sleeve to show a small scar on his forearm. "I got this testing a go-kart when I was not much older than you. Every time I see it, I remember how I got back in the cart the next day, even though I was scared." Marcus stared at the scar with fascination. "You were scared too?" "Many times," Louis admitted. "Fear is part of being brave. You can't have courage without feeling afraid first." Angela approached quietly. "Louis, I hate to interrupt, but we need to leave in 5 minutes to make your flight." Louis nodded, then turned back to Marcus and Imani. "Before I go, could I get your contact information? I'd like to check in after Chew." "Marcus's surgery, if that's okay." Imani provided her phone number and address, still unable to believe this was happening. Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, wanted to check in on her son. "When exactly is the surgery scheduled?" Louis asked. "June 15th, Imani replied. "About 6 weeks from now." Louis made a note in his phone. "And which hospital?" "Detroit. Children's," Imani said, not adding that she was still figuring out how to pay for it. The insurance would cover part, but their deductible was high, and there would be other expenses not covered. Louis seemed to be thinking deeply about something. He exchanged a look with Angela, who nodded slightly. "Marcus," Louis said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "I need you to make me a promise." Marcus nodded solemnly. "Anything?" "I want you to be as brave for your surgery as you were coming all the way to Miami to see me. Can you do that?" "I promise," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Good. Because champions keep their promises," Louis said, holding out his pinky finger. "Pinky swear?" Marcus linked his small finger with Louis's. "Pinky swear." Louis stood up. "Now, I think we should take one more photo. But this time, I want you to show me your best racing stance." Marcus immediately dropped into a crouch, arms out like he was gripping an invisible steering wheel, face intense with concentration. Louis mirrored the pose beside him, equally serious. "Perfect! You look like a real driver." Angela took the photo, then announced it was time to go. Louis gave Marcus one last high five. "It was an honor to meet you, Marcus Johnson," he said. "I won't forget you." As they walked toward the exit, Louis pulled Imani aside for a moment. "You've raised an amazing son," he said quietly. "The way you came all this way for him, that's real love." "Thank you," Imani managed, fighting back tears. This meant everything to him. Louis nodded. "David will drive you to the bus station. And please, stay in touch through Angela." I meant what I said about checking in after the surgery. They said their goodbyes, and then Louis was gone, whisked away to his next appointment. Marcus stood staring after him, clutching his signed toy car and wearing his race-worn cap. "Did that really happen?" he asked in a hushed voice, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "It really did," Imani assured him, feeling the same sense of wonder. David drove them to the bus station, with Marcus chattering excitedly the whole way about every detail of the meeting. How Louis smelled like clean laundry and cool cologne. How his handshake was strong but not squeezy. How he really listened when Marcus talked, not like adults who just pretended to listen. They arrived at the bus station with 20 minutes to spare. As David helped them with their small suitcase, he handed Imani an envelope. "From Angela," he explained. "A little something for your journey home." Inside the envelope was $200 in cash and a note that read, "For meals and comfort on your trip back." Louis insisted, "Safe travels." Imani tried to give it back, but David shook his head. "It would make him happy to know you accepted it," he said. "That's just who he is." As the bus pulled away from Miami, heading north toward Detroit, Marcus gazed out the window at the palm trees and blue sky. "This was worth everything, wasn't it, Mom?" he asked, his voice sleepy but content. "Every single mile," Imani agreed, thinking of the sold necklace, the lost job, the uncomfortable bus ride, None of it mattered compared to the joy on her son's face. Marcus fell asleep soon after, still wearing the cap, the toy car clutched in his hand. Imani watched him breathing peacefully, her heart full of gratitude. She had no way of knowing that Lewis Hamilton's promise to check in after the surgery would turn out to mean something far more extraordinary than she could imagine. She had no way of knowing that Lewis Hamilton's promise to check in after the surgery would turn out to mean something far more extraordinary than she could imagine. The bus pulled into a rest stop somewhere in Georgia. It was late afternoon, and they had been traveling for hours. Marcus was still sleeping, the excitement of the morning having worn him out completely. Imani gently adjusted the Mercedes cap that had slipped over his eyes. Even in sleep, his fingers remained curled tightly around the signed toy car. The sight made her smile, though her mind was already racing ahead to the challenges waiting for them in Detroit. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it to be from her neighbor checking on their apartment, she was surprised to see it was from Angela, Lewis Hamilton's assistant. Lewis wanted to make sure you and Marcus are comfortable on your journey home. He also mentioned he didn't get to speak with you privately and wondered if you might have time for a quick call before his flight leaves. Imani stared at the message in disbelief. Lewis Hamilton wanted to call her. She quickly replied that yes, she was available, and provided the rest stop name so she'd have reception. Less than 5 minutes later, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, stepping outside the bus for privacy. "Imani? It's Lewis Hamilton." His voice was just as warm over the phone as it had been in person. "I hope I'm not interrupting your trip." "No, not at all," Imani said, still shocked to be having this conversation. "We're at a rest stop in Georgia. Marcus is sleeping." "Good. He needs his rest," Lewis said. "Listen, I wanted to chat with you without Marcus hearing. There was something in your eyes today. A worry that went beyond his medical condition." Imani was silent, unsure how to respond. How could this famous person have noticed something so personal in their brief meeting? "I hope I'm not overstepping," Lewis continued when she didn't speak. "But my mom was a single parent too. I know that look. It's the 'how am I going to manage everything' look." A lump formed in Imani's throat. "It's been challenging," she admitted. "Tell me about it," Lewis said, "if you're comfortable." And suddenly, standing in a rest stop parking lot in Georgia, Imani found herself confessing everything to Lewis Hamilton. About losing her job at the office supply store, about the mounting medical bills, about selling her mother's necklace. To make this trip happen. "I don't regret it," she finished. "Seeing Marcus so happy today made it all worthwhile, but I'm not sure what we're going back to." Lewis was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said finally. "That can't have been easy." "I'm not looking for help," Imani said quickly. "That's not why I told you." "I know that," Lewis assured her. "But I'd like to help anyway, if you'll let me." "We'll be fine," Imani said, though she wasn't sure how true that was. "We always find a way." "I'm sure you do," Lewis said. "But sometimes it's okay to accept help when it's offered. My foundation works with children facing medical and financial challenges. Would you be open to letting us explore some options for Marcus?" Imani hesitated. Pride told her to refuse, but love for her son pushed her to consider it. "I don't want to be a charity case," she said finally. "This isn't charity," Lewis said firmly. "This is one human being helping another. My mom struggled too. Someone helped us when I was starting in racing. Now I have the chance to do the same." Tears welled in Imani's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me see what we can do," Lewis replied. "No promises yet, just exploring options." Okay, Imani agreed softly. Thank you. There's something else, Lewis said. I didn't mention this to Marcus because I didn't want to get his hopes up, but I know some of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the world. Would you be open to getting a second opinion on his case? Imani's breath caught. Of course, but our insurance. Let me worry about that part, Lewis interrupted gently. All I need is your permission to have someone review his medical records. Yes, Imani said without hesitation. Anything that might help him. Good. Angela will be in touch about the details. Lewis paused. One last thing. What was the necklace? Like the one you sold? The question surprised her. It was gold, with a small heart-shaped pendant. It belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, then me. It wasn't worth much in money, but it was priceless to you, Lewis finished. I understand. They spoke for a few more minutes, with Lewis asking about Marcus's favorite foods, colors, and school subjects. Imani found herself relaxing, almost forgetting she was speaking to a world-famous athlete. I should let you go, Lewis said eventually. Angela tells me they're calling my flight. Thank you for everything today, Imani said. Not just the gifts or this call, but for making Marcus feel special, for really seeing him. He made quite an impression, Lewis said, and Imani could hear the smile in his voice. Most adults wouldn't have the courage to do what he did, travel across the country on faith, just holding on to hope. As they said goodbye, Imani noticed a group of teenagers at the rest stop, pointing at her and whispering. One of them approached cautiously. Sorry, but were you just talking to Lewis Hamilton? The girl asked, eyes wide with disbelief. Imani nodded, still holding her phone. Oh my God, we saw the story online. You're Marcus's mom, the boy with the sign. The teenagers gathered around her, asking questions about Lewis and taking selfies with her. By the time Imani returned to the bus, Marcus was awake, rubbing his eyes. Where'd you go, Mom? He asked sleepily. Just making a call, Imani said, sitting beside him. How are you feeling? Happy, Marcus said simply. Today was the best day ever. As the bus pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward Detroit, Imani thought about her conversation with Lewis. She hadn't asked for help. She'd never expected it. But something told her that their story wasn't over yet. She looked at Marcus, admiring his cap in the reflection of the bus window, and silently thanked whatever twist of fate had put that photographer in their path yesterday. Sometimes miracles did happen, and sometimes they were just beginning. Sometimes miracles did happen, and sometimes they were just beginning. The rest of their journey back to Detroit passed in a blur of bus stations, fast food meals, and long stretches of highway. Marcus spent most of the time either sleeping or telling other passengers about meeting Lewis Hamilton. He showed his cap and signed toy car to anyone who would look, his eyes shining with excitement. Lewis said my scar will be a badge of honor, he told an elderly woman sitting across from them. Just like his racing scars. By the time they finally arrived in Detroit, both Imani and Marcus were exhausted. Their apartment felt small and shabby after their adventure, but it was home. Back to real life, Imani murmured as she unlocked the door. The stack of mail waiting for them was intimidating. Bills, mostly, and a final notice from the electric company. Imani set them aside to deal with later. Right now, they needed rest. Marcus carefully placed his Lewis Hamilton cap on his dresser, positioning it just so, like a museum piece. The signed toy car went next to it. Do you think Lewis will really call after my surgery? He asked, as Imani tucked him into bed. "If he said he would, then he will," Imani replied, though part of her wondered if the famous driver would remember them once he returned to his glamorous life. The next morning, Imani called Dr. Wilson's office to schedule a pre-surgical appointment for Marcus. Then she called both her former employers. As expected, the office supply store had already replaced her. The diner manager was more understanding, offering her weekend shifts if she wanted them. "It's better than nothing," Imani told herself, as she updated their budget. With the reduced income, they would barely make rent. The hospital bills would have to wait. 3 days after they returned from Miami, Imani's phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello, is this Imani Johnson?" a professional-sounding woman asked. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen from Boston Children's Hospital. I've been asked to consult on your son Marcus's case." Imani nearly dropped the phone. "Boston Children's Hospital? I don't understand." "Mr. Hamilton's foundation contacted us," Dr. Chen explained. "They've sent over Marcus's medical records, with your permission, of course, and I've reviewed them thoroughly." Imani sat down, her legs suddenly weak. "And? I believe Marcus would be an excellent candidate for a new surgical approach we've been pioneering here. It's less invasive than traditional open-heart surgery, with a significantly shorter recovery time and better long-term outcomes." Imani's mind raced. Boston was one of the top medical centers in the country. This kind of opportunity was beyond anything she could have arranged herself. "That sounds amazing," she said carefully, "but I don't think our insurance would cover treatment out of state, especially at a specialized hospital." "That's already been addressed," Dr. Chen said. "Mr. Hamilton's foundation has arranged for all expenses to be covered. The only question is whether you're interested in pursuing this option." Tears sprang to Imani's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course we're interested." Dr. Chen outlined the next steps: a video consultation, some additional tests that could be done locally, and then a decision about whether to proceed with surgery in Boston. "If we decide this is the best approach for Marcus, we'd want to schedule the procedure within the next month," Dr. Chen explained. "Recovery would require staying in Boston for about 2 weeks afterward." After hanging up, Imani sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. Lewis Hamilton hadn't just made a polite offer. He had already set things in motion to give Marcus the best medical care possible. That evening, after Marcus was in bed, Imani received another call. This time, it was Angela, Lewis's assistant. "I wanted to check that Dr. Chen reached you," Angela said. Lewis was very specific about finding the best pediatric cardiac team for Marcus. "She called," Imani confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Thank Lewis for this." "He doesn't expect thanks," Angela said warmly. "But there's more we need to discuss. The foundation would like to arrange accommodations for you in Boston during Marcus's treatment and recovery. And Lewis was concerned about your employment situation." "My employment situation?" Imani repeated, surprised. "He mentioned you might need some flexibility for Marcus's care," Angela said diplomatically. "We have some connections with companies in the Boston area that might be a good fit for your skills." Imani's head was spinning. It's overwhelming." "I understand," Angela said. "You don't need to decide anything right now. But there's one more thing Lewis wanted me to mention." She paused. "He asked about a necklace?" Imani's hand went instinctively to her throat, where the family necklace had hung for years. "Yes?" "He's had someone trying to locate it at pawn shops in Detroit. With the date and description you gave, we think we've found it. Lewis would like your permission to repurchase it for you." Tears flowed freely down Imani's cheeks now. Why is he doing all this? We're just strangers to him." "Not strangers," Angela corrected gently. "Louis was deeply moved by your story, by what you sacrificed for your son. He said something about paying forward kindness that was once shown to him." After the call ended, Imani stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. In the bedroom, Marcus slept peacefully, unaware that his life was about to change dramatically. Tomorrow, she would tell him about Boston, about the new surgery, about the incredible generosity of the man he admired so much. But tonight, she simply held the moment close, a fragile bubble of hope cradled in her hands. Lewis Hamilton had promised to check in after the surgery, but it seemed he had something much more powerful in mind, a promise to help change their lives before the surgery even began. Lewis Hamilton had promised to check in after the surgery, but it seemed he had something much more powerful in mind, a promise to help change their lives before the surgery even began. The next morning, Imani sat Marcus down at their small kitchen table to explain everything. His eyes grew wider with each detail. "We're going to Boston?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "For a special surgery?" "Yes," Imani confirmed. "Dr. Chen says they have a new way to help fix your heart that might be better than what our doctors here planned." "And Louis arranged it all?" Marcus could barely sit still. "The Lewis Hamilton?" Imani nodded. "His foundation is helping us. They're covering all the medical costs, and they're arranging a place for us to stay in Boston while you recover." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "Why is Louis doing this for us, Mom? We only met him one time." It was a good question, one Imani had asked herself repeatedly since yesterday's calls. "I think," she said slowly, "that some people, when they have the power to help others, feel it's their duty to do so. Louis saw someone who needed help, and he chose to give it." "Like a superhero," Marcus said thoughtfully. "In a way," Imani agreed, "but a real-life one." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. They had video consultations with Dr. Chen and her team. Marcus underwent additional tests at Detroit Children's Hospital, with the results sent directly to Boston. Angela called frequently with updates and questions. "The foundation has found an apartment for you near the hospital," she told Imani. "It's fully furnished and available for as long as you need it." Meanwhile, another unexpected blessing arrived. A package containing Imani's mother's necklace, restored to its original condition. With it was a note in Louis's handwriting. "Some treasures should stay in the family. See you in Boston." Imani held the necklace to her heart, overwhelmed by the gesture. The pawn shop owner had sold it to a collector, who had sold it to someone else. Louis's team had tracked it through 3 different owners to bring it back to her. As news of their story spread, their community rallied around them. Marcus's school held a special send-off party. Neighbors brought meals and small gifts for their journey. Even Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, who had watched Marcus the day Imani sold the necklace, baked cookies shaped like race cars. The decision to accept the surgery in Boston was easy. Dr. Chen's approach offered Marcus the best chance at a normal life, a shorter recovery time, a smaller scar, and most importantly, a more complete repair of his heart defect. The harder decision was about what came after. Angela had sent information about several job opportunities in Boston, companies that had connections to Mercedes or to Louis's foundation. One position, at a community outreach center affiliated with a hospital, seemed perfect for Imani's skills. "Would we move to Boston permanently?" Marcus asked when Imani discussed the possibility with him. "I don't know," Imani admitted. "It would be a big change. We'd be far from everything familiar." Marcus considered this. "But I'd have a fixed heart. and you'd have a better job. He looked around their small apartment. And maybe we wouldn't have to worry about bills so much. Out of the mouths of babes, Imani thought. Even at 8 years old, Marcus was aware of their financial struggles. The day before they were scheduled to leave for Boston, Imani gave notice to their landlord and put most of their belongings in storage. It wasn't a final decision to move, she told herself, just preparing for the possibility. Their last night in the apartment, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept checking and rechecking his small suitcase, making sure his Lewis Hamilton cap and signed toy car were safely packed. "What if the surgery doesn't work?" he asked, as Imani tucked him in for the third time. "What if my heart still isn't normal after?" Imani sat on the edge of his bed. Dr. Chen is one of the best doctors in the country. But even if things don't work out perfectly, we'll handle it together, like we always do. Marcus nodded, but she could see fear in his eyes. "Lewis promised to visit me in the hospital," he said. "Do you think he really will?" "If he promised, then he will," Imani said, and this time she believed it. Lewis Hamilton had shown himself to be a man of his word. The next morning, they were surprised to find not a taxi waiting for them, as expected, but a sleek black SUV, the same kind that had picked them up at the motel in Miami. "Lewis wanted to make sure you traveled in comfort," the driver explained, loading their luggage. The drive to the airport was quiet, both Imani and Marcus lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. At the terminal, they were met by a woman, holding a sign with their name. "I'm Sophia from the Hamilton Foundation," she introduced herself. "I'll be escorting you to Boston and helping you get settled." She guided them through check-in and security, then to a private lounge where they waited for their flight. Marcus was wide-eyed at the comfortable chairs and free snacks. "Is this how Lewis travels all the time?" he whispered to Imani. "I imagine so," she whispered back, equally impressed. Their flight was called, and Sophia led them to the boarding gate. As they prepared to board, Imani's phone buzzed with a text message. "Wishing you both a safe journey. Marcus, remember our pinky promise about being brave. I'll see you soon." LH Imani showed the message to Marcus, whose face lit up with a smile. "See, Mom? He remembers." As they settled into their seats, first class, another surprise from Lewis, Imani reflected on the whirlwind their lives had become. Just weeks ago, they had been on a cramped bus heading to Miami, with nothing but hope and determination. Now they were flying first class to Boston, toward a future brighter than she could have imagined. The plane took off, leaving Detroit behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility, opportunity, and the promise of healing. For the first time in years, Imani allowed herself to hope without reservation. The plane took off, leaving Detroit behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility, opportunity, and the promise of healing. For the first time in years, Imani allowed herself to hope without reservation. Boston welcomed them with a perfect summer day, blue skies and a gentle breeze that made the city sparkle. Sophia, their guide from the Hamilton Foundation, escorted them from the airport to their temporary home, an apartment in a brick building just 3 blocks from Boston Children's Hospital. "This is where we're staying?" Marcus gasped as they entered. The apartment was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. There were 2 bedrooms, a fully equipped kitchen, and a living room with comfortable furniture. "Hayati Foundation arranged everything," Sophia explained, showing them around. "The fridge is stocked with food, and there's a tablet with instructions for anything you might need." On the coffee table sat a welcome basket filled with snacks, books, and a small stuffed bear wearing a tiny hospital gown. A card attached read, "For Marcus, something to keep you company during your hospital stay. See you soon." Louis, Marcus hugged the bear immediately. "I'm going to name him Champion," he decided. Their first week in Boston was filled with medical appointments. Dr. Chen and her team conducted final evaluations, explained the surgical procedure in detail, and answered all their questions. Marcus took it all in stride, clutching Champion the bear during the scarier parts of the discussions. "The surgery is scheduled for next Monday," Dr. Chen told them during their final consultation. "Marcus will need to be at the hospital at 6 a.m. That weekend, Imani took Marcus sightseeing around Boston. They visited the New England Aquarium, walked part of the Freedom Trail, and ate ice cream in Boston Common. Imani wanted to give Marcus happy memories of the city that might soon become their home. Sunday evening, as they prepared a simple dinner in their apartment, Imani's phone rang. It was Angela. "Louis wanted me to let you know he's thinking of Marcus," she said. "He'll be at a race in Europe when the surgery happens, but he's arranged a surprise for tomorrow morning." "A surprise?" Imani asked, intrigued. "You'll see," Angela replied mysteriously. "Just be ready at 5:30 a.m. instead of 6. That night, neither Imani nor Marcus slept much. Marcus was too nervous about the surgery, while Imani was both anxious about the procedure and curious about Louis's surprise. At 5 a.m., they were both awake and getting ready. Marcus carefully packed Champion the bear in his small hospital bag. He wore his Lewis Hamilton cap, insisting it would bring him luck. "Whatever happens today," Imani told him as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know how proud I am of your bravery." Marcus hugged her tightly. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted. "I know, baby. But like Louis said, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared." At exactly 5:30 a.m., a knock came at their door. Imani opened it to find a tall man in a Mercedes team shirt. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson." "Marcus, I'm Tom from the Hamilton team. I'm here to escort you to the hospital." Outside, a sleek silver Mercedes waited at the curb. But that wasn't the surprise. The surprise was what, or rather, who, was on the car. The entire vehicle was wrapped in a custom design. On the hood was a large number 44, Louis's racing number. Along the sides were messages of support from every driver on the Formula One grid. "Stay strong, Marcus. You've got this, champ. Racing to recovery." And on the rear window, in Louis's handwriting, "Champions never give up. I'll be racing for you today, Marcus." Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, his mouth open in shock. "All the drivers? They all know about me?" Tom smiled. "Louis told them your story. They all wanted to help." The surprise continued at the hospital, where they were led not to a standard room, but to a special suite decorated with Formula One memorabilia. On the walls hung signed photographs from various drivers. A racing simulator sat in one corner, and on the bed was a child-sized racing suit, custom-made to match Louis's Mercedes gear, with M. Johnson stitched above the heart. Louis wanted to make sure this didn't feel too scary, a nurse explained as she helped Marcus change into a hospital gown. "He said you're part of the racing family now." As the medical team prepared Marcus for surgery, a video call came through. On a large screen in the room, it was Louis, dressed in his racing suit, live from the European track. "Marcus, how are you feeling, champ?" His smile was warm and genuine. "Nervous," Marcus admitted, clutching Champion the bear. "But I'm trying to be brave." "That's all anyone can ask," Louis said. "I'm about to go into a race, and I'm nervous too. That's normal. But I've got something to show you." He turned the camera to reveal his helmet for that day's race. Along the Idrik side was a special edition, a small drawing of a heart with Marcus's name inside it. "I'm racing for you today," Lewis said, "and I made a little change to my car too." He walked the camera over to his Mercedes race car. There, just visible on the halo safety device, was another small heart symbol. Now, every time the camera shows my car during the race, people all over the world will see that heart and think of you, Lewis explained. "We're connected today, Marcus. You fight in your race, and I'll fight in mine." Tears filled Imani's eyes as she watched her son's face light up with joy and determination. "I'll be as strong as you, Lewis," Marcus promised. "And when I wake up, I want to hear that you won your race." "That's a deal," Lewis said with a wink. "See you on the other side of the finish line, champion." As the medical team wheeled Marcus toward the operating room, Imani walked alongside, holding his hand. He wasn't crying or scared anymore. He was focused, determined, just like his hero before a big race. "I love you, Mom," he said as they reached the doors where she couldn't follow. "I love you too, my brave boy," she replied, kissing his forehead. "I'll be right here when you wake up." The hours of surgery were the longest of Imani's life. She sat in the waiting room, alternating between prayer and watching the Formula One race on a small TV in the corner. True to his word, Lewis was having an exceptional day, fighting his way from fourth on the grid to challenge for the lead. Midway through the race, Angela arrived at the hospital to sit with Imani. "Lewis insisted I come keep you company," she explained. "He's getting updates on Marcus between radio calls to his team." Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, still in her surgical gown but with a smile on her face. "The surgery was a complete success," she announced. "Even better than we hoped. Marcus's heart is responding beautifully to the repair, and the minimally invasive approach worked perfectly." Relief flooded through Imani, so powerful she could barely stand. "When can I see him?" "He's in recovery now. You can see him in about 30 minutes, Dr. Chen explained. "He's going to be groggy, but he was asking about the race as soon as he started waking up from the anesthesia." Imani laughed through her tears. "Of course he was. On the TV, the race was in its final laps. Lewis Hamilton, in a stunning display of skill, had taken the lead and was pulling away from the field. When Imani was finally allowed to see Marcus, he was pale but peaceful in the recovery room, Champion the bear tucked beside him. His eyes fluttered open when she took his hand. "Mom," he whispered, "did Lewis win?" "He did," Imani confirmed, having watched the finish just before coming in. "He dominated the last part of the race." A small smile crossed Marcus's face before he drifted back to sleep. The next 2 weeks were a time of healing and hope. Marcus recovered remarkably quickly. Aided by the less invasive surgical technique, Lewis called via video chat every other day, sometimes from racetracks around the world, sometimes from his home. Other drivers sent messages and gifts. Marcus's room looked more like a Formula One museum than a hospital suite. During this time, Imani made a decision. She accepted the job offer at the Community Outreach Center in Boston. They would stay, making a fresh start in this city that had given them so much. 3 weeks after the surgery, Marcus was fully discharged, with only regular checkups needed to monitor his progress. His scar was small, a thin line that would fade with time, nothing like the major chest scar they had originally expected. "It's still my badge of honor," Marcus insisted, proudly showing it to Lewis during one of their video calls. "The best kind," Lewis agreed. "One that shows you're stronger than before?" On the day they moved into their permanent apartment, a bright 2-bedroom place in a good school district, a special package arrived. Inside was a custom-made racing charm bracelet with a tiny silver car pendant. Engraved on the back were the words, Never give up. Lewis had it made specially, Angela explained over the phone. He wanted Marcus to have something to remind him of his journey. But the biggest surprise came 2 months after the surgery, when Marcus had been cleared for normal activity. An invitation arrived for both of them to attend the United States Grand Prix in Austin, Texas, as Lewis Hamilton's personal guests. All expenses paid, Angela assured them. Lewis wants to see how well Marcus is doing in person. The race weekend was beyond anything they could have imagined. They were given all-access passes, toured the Mercedes garage, and met the entire team. Other drivers stopped by to meet Marcus, now something of a legend in the Formula One community. The night before the race, Lewis invited them to dinner in a private room at his hotel. It was there that he finally shared his own secret with Marcus. "When I was about your age," Lewis said, "I was diagnosed with dyslexia. Many people told me I wouldn't succeed because of it. Some kids made fun of me. And for a while, I believed I was less because of it." Marcus listened intently, his eyes never leaving Lewis's face. "But my dad taught me something important," Lewis continued. "He said that sometimes what others see as a weakness can become your greatest strength. My dyslexia made me work harder, focus more, and develop different ways of learning. It made me who I am." He reached across the table to tap Marcus gently on the chest, right above his heart. "Your super heart isn't a weakness, Marcus. It's part of what makes you special. This journey you've been on, it's given you courage and perspective that most people never develop, even as adults." Tears filled Imani's eyes as she watched her son absorb these words from his hero. "Is that why you helped us so much?" Marcus asked. "Because you understand what it's like to be different." Lewis nodded. "Partly that, and partly because someone helped my family once, when we were struggling. My dad worked multiple jobs to support my racing, but it still wasn't enough. Then someone believed in us and gave us a chance. Now I can do that for others." On race day, Lewis gave Marcus one final surprise, a special tour of the track in the driver's parade. As they circled the circuit, Lewis held Marcus up so the crowd could see him, telling the story of the brave boy from Detroit over the car's radio, which was broadcast to the entire stadium. The crowd roared with approval, thousands of people cheering for Marcus, who waved shyly, his face glowing with happiness. Later, when Lewis won the race in spectacular fashion, he dedicated his victory to "a young champion who taught me about true bravery." And as he stood on the podium, spraying champagne, he pointed to where Marcus and Imani sat in the special guests section, making sure the cameras caught the moment. That night, as they prepared to return to their new life in Boston, Marcus looked up at Imani with serious eyes. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "I think I know what I want to be when I grow up." "A race car driver?" Imani guessed with a smile. Marcus shook his head. "I want to be like Lewis, not just the racing part. I want to help people who need it, the way he helped us." Imani hugged her son close, her heart full to bursting with love and pride. From a desperate journey undertaken on nothing but hope, they had found not just healing, but a new purpose, a new home, and a new extended family in the most unexpected of places. And it had all begun with a mother's love, a child's dream, and a champion who remembered what it meant to struggle, and what it meant to help someone else win their most important race. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more emotional, true stories that showcase the best of humanity. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below.